Hello, friends, and welcome to Christian Connections from Loma Linda, California. I'm Ganem Hanna, and we're so glad that we can be with you on this beautiful day. Whatever you might be around the world, big greetings from all of us here at Loma Linda, and we wish that you stay with us for the next hour as we're going to explore a very, very important topic. But let me introduce our guest. To my left, Bob Blancato.
Hello, Ganem.
It's good to have you with us.
Good to be here.
And today you will be introducing the music for us.
Oh, we've got great music. I'm honored.
Well, we're all honored for good music all
Yes.
the time. And we always get great talents down here. So we'll come back to you in a few moments. But last and not least, I'd like to welcome our guest, Dr. Jim Gibson. And he is the director. Are you the director for for the geoscience?
Yes.
All right. Tell us what that is.
Well, it's a service of the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists. It is commissioned to explore the world of nature using science to study, explore, understand, try to develop an understanding of nature that is consistent with the light that we have from Scripture, and then to share that understanding with others.
That's wonderful. How long have you been doing this?
Well, the Institute was started in 1958.
Wow.
It was originally at Andrews University. It moved to Loma Linda University in 1980. I joined the staff in 1984. So it's 35 years now.
Wow, it should have some credibility by now for having those kind of years put in developing its platform and its
It's been an interesting experience.
Well, today we're going to learn a lot from you. You bring us a special talking points today, or a lecture, for lack of better words. What are you going to be presenting for us?
I want to talk about the value of human life in the light of creation and the scriptural story. What can we say about the value of human life?
Value of human life. Well, that would be very interesting. Stay there, visit with us for the next few moments as Bob will invite our musician and bless us by their talent.
And they are talented, because I always come early and I get to hear rehearsal. And rehearsal is very revealing. Very masterful performers we have here. This evening we're going to start with Sophia Lalas. And she is a 7th grader. She will be performing Via della Rosa. That was nothing short of masterful.
Amen.
Bravo. Bravo to Sophia, 7th grade, right here in Loma Linda at the Loma Linda Academy. And we thank her so much for the beautiful rendition of Via Della Rosa. Ganem.
What an incredible talent for such a young woman.
Exactly.
Amazing, amazing. Well, Dr. Gibson, please feel free to take the stand to share with us your message. Dr. Gibson is the director of he's actually the director of the Geoscience Institute of the General Conference. Go ahead, Doctor.
All right, so thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here with you. And I want to talk this evening for a few minutes about the value of human life. And the reason for that value, I think, can be expressed in the context of the creation story. If you read the creation story in Genesis 1, you look at the 6th day of creation. And I like to think of God standing in front of the land, and he says, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures." And then there's a few different names. There's the beasts of the field and the creeping things and so on. And then after he's done with that, he says, "Now let's make man in our image." And I noticed the contrast right there. When he makes the animals, it's kind of like a creation in mass. Now, he didn't name them. He didn't name the giraffe and the lion and all that. It's just the living creatures, and he had in mind certain things, I'm sure, and they appeared according to his mind as he commanded them to appear. But when he gets to humans, he pauses and makes a special announcement. We're going to make man now. Man may have many characteristics of the animals, but he's created separately, distinctly. But more than that, one thing that really impressed me as I got to thinking about this, first, he makes Adam, an individual, not a creation in mass, but he makes one person. I think that's significant. I think it indicates that humans are individual persons in contrast to the animals, which are kind of think of as a group. And after he makes Adam, he makes another person individually. He makes Eve individually, not part of he could have spoken them both into existence with the animals, but no, he makes them as individuals, Adam and then Eve, as though people are special, created separately, created in the image of God, created individually. And that's meaningful to me. It means every person is an individual and receives God's attention. Just like Adam and Eve each received God's full attention, I think each of us today receives God's attention. There's more than that, though. He also gave this new creature, these two creatures, this pair, he gave them the image of himself. Now, there's a lot of ink that's been spilled over what that means, and I'm not going to be able to answer that question, but I think we can see some of the things it means, but especially in the context of the value of the individual, it certainly means that humans are special in God's sight. It certainly means that humans are set apart from the creatures. And probably part of that image is also something that God gave at that moment. And he said, "Let them have dominion over the other creatures." That's a significant point. Humans were entrusted to watch out for, to manage, to care for this creation that God had made. You know, most of us have probably made something in our lives. We've made might be a toy that we put together, it might be a painting that we drew, whatever it is, we've made some object. And the more as we put time into that and we think about it, we value it. And if somebody comes along and breaks it, we feel kind of bad about it because it's something we created. We have an interest in it. And I can just see God giving humans this responsibility to care for creation. And, here God He's planned this out. If you look at the days of creation, you see a lot of design and plan and forethought. And then he hands it over to humans. Wow. What a responsibility and what trust God had in Adam and Eve in order to do that. So in the creation story, I think we are given a glimpse of how God has given to humans a special status and how God values us. That is, He made us individually. He made us in His image. He gave us dominion over the other creatures. That is, I think, an indication of how God values humans. Now, we can trace through history after the creation, we ran into a little problem called sin. And we have the fall, and then we have the history of what we might call salvation history. You have God guiding through Enoch and Noah and Abraham and Moses and so on, all the way down to the days of Jesus. And I think we see God demonstrating his appreciation for and his concern for and value of humans all through that history. And it kind of comes to a real culmination in the life of Jesus. In the life of Jesus, I think, gives us a second context in which to see demonstrated God's care and interest in humans and the value of humans in God's sight. First of all, the fact that Jesus himself, that's the Creator himself, according to John 1:1-3 and Colossians 1:16 and 17 and many other verses, the Creator himself came down for the purpose of rescuing these people that he had created, that he valued, that he left in charge, and they kind of flubbed it up, and yet he didn't discard them. He came down showing his care for humans, to even worth suffering for them, even worth giving up some of his own privileges and pleasure and comfort, just for these people who had failed so miserably in the trust that he'd given them. But in addition to that, it goes more. When we look at the way Jesus treated people, in his day, those people who were sick or had handicap of some sort were clearly thought to be, at least, clearly under God's displeasure, and they probably deserved it. And so there's not too much wisdom in trying to undo the curse that God put on them because they deserved it. So to try to help somebody who was infirm might actually be the wrong thing to do. Jesus completely overturned that idea. He spent most of his time dealing with people who were poor, sick, suffering in some way. Remember in the story of Jesus in the synagogue at Nazareth in Luke 4, he quoted from Isaiah that he had come here to heal the brokenhearted, to preach the gospel to the poor. That was his mission. So that shows his concern not only for those who are privileged, but for the unfortunate as well. And so you see him healing this woman. He said, this daughter of Abraham has been in, Satan is bound for 18 years. And isn't it right that she be loosed on the Sabbath? And he healed the blind man who had been blind from birth. And got into a dispute with the Pharisees, of course, over that, but it shows his power. And he even healed the mentally ill, the demon-possessed. And I think we could talk for a long time about how Jesus dealt with people who were regarded as inferior and not really worthy of care. But Jesus showed these are the people that are worthy of care. Jesus said, I see in these people a restored potential. They can be just as whole as anyone else. So, in the creation story, we see great value put into man at the origin. Then in the life and teachings of Jesus, we see the value that God put on humans even in a fallen state. Now, when I step back and think about those things, and I think about my own life and how do I treat people, and how do I think about people, and I look at our society, and I'm troubled. And I have to admit, I struggle my own self with my own feelings. But I'm troubled when I see the mentally ill and the homeless in the streets. I know we can't solve all the problems of homelessness, but I feel badly that we do not provide a place for caring for these people, especially the mentally ill. I think of the unborn and the argument we have over abortion on demand. And I think, these are not, I don't want to get into all the deep political and theological issues with abortion. But I think we need to look at an unborn child as an unborn person with the potential of any other person, and we ought to value that life. We ought to value that person on the street. We ought to value, and maybe it's just as hard to value that billionaire who may have views we don't appreciate. And I look in our society and I say, what would happen to our society? How might it be different if everybody valued everyone else in a way that God would approve? Wouldn't we have a different society? And I think of, well, we can talk about immigrants. You can talk about those who are unemployed. We can talk about the uneducated, the so-called unwashed masses, and the deplorables, and all the other terms that have been used. But I think as Christians, we should think of these situations in the context of the value that God has put on them. These are people who are made in the image of God. The image may be damaged. The people may not appreciate it. And we may not be able to solve their problems, but somehow we need God's Spirit to guide us, to have the right attitude. And if you can just imagine, Jesus would probably do things differently than we would, than I would. He'd probably go speak to that man on the street. He can't offer him a job. He's not going to fill his pockets with money. But he can tell that person that God loves him, that there's a plan for him, there's hope for his life, there's value in his life, and bring hope to that man. And I hope that's the kind of society that we can live in. I'd like to see that in Loma Linda. I'd like to see that in Chile. If you remember, there are times when our society has shown something about the value of human life. Remember, I mentioned Chile because I was thinking of that story of the miners. Remember those miners that were caught in that mine when it collapsed? Remember how a whole group of people got together and they drilled a hole, and it took a long time to get down to where those people were, hoping that they'd find them alive. That shows there's still some of that remembrance, that memory of the value of humans. And I remember a striking story of a man in Joshua Tree National Park who had fallen down in some rocks and gotten stuck there. And it was impossible for him to get out, and nobody could see him. And it just seemed like a miracle. He was found. And people rejoiced over the value of that one lost hiker. And you could perhaps think of the story of Jesus and the 90 and 9. But there are bright spots. Another one was this group of students, I think it was in a cave, was it in Asia perhaps? And divers, one diver even lost his life to go in and try to help with these students. And so there's a mixture. We have a memory, a cultural memory of Christ's value for humans, and that inspires us also to go out to go after the lost, to seek for people, to help the poor, and so on. And then we have also the unfortunate influence of group competition, and it seems sometimes we have groups of people who are angry and conflicting, but there's hope. There's principles that we can live by, and humans have a value that God put into them originally, and humans still have that value that Jesus showed us. Sometimes we show it ourselves, praise God for that, and sometimes we're not so good. We can work on that and try to develop policies and procedures, and as a Christian fellowship, we may be able to develop ways where we can offer help, offer encouragement to those who are discouraged, to those who are lonely, to those who are sick, to those who are troubled by their circumstances. So that is what I think would be a way to think about the value of human life.
Thank you, Dr. Gibson. Come back and join us here as we continue our conversation with you. It's interesting you bring this topic because, when Jesus was on earth, he didn't look up high to mankind, and he didn't look low. He always looked people right on as individuals. He gave the love and the respect and to those who came and circled with him, and he surrounded himself, like you said, by the least fortunate, but yet he almost made them equals around him.
Yes, and it struck me that, we hear the emphasis on him healing the sick and talking to the poor, because there was kind of accusation, people criticizing him for that, and it's true, he did that. But at the same time, you think of Nicodemus. Here's one proud, rich man.
Right.
And Jesus wasn't condemning him either. He worked for him too.
Correct.
It's an amazing ability that he showed to minister to people individually, right where they are. Just the rich, the poor, the sick, the healthy, the religious, the secular, the Jew, the Gentile, the male, the female. He was interested in everyone as an individual, just like in the creation, creating them individually. It's an example of love and character that, I would like to emulate. I would like to live in that kind of a society.
Right. Even to his death, when he was on the cross, he was not of concern for himself.
Right.
He was still given instructions.
Right. To his disciple regarding his mother,
That's
to
correct.
the thief regarding salvation, and so much so that the Roman centurion, he was impressed.
Right.
Surely this was the Son of God.
So here's the benchmark or the scale that shows us how compassionate we ought to be with one another,
Yes.
regardless of rank or gender,
Right.
nationality, whatever that makes someone else different from us. that gives us no excuse to look down at them or even to look higher. We're all humans.
Right.
And we're all equals.
Just to really make an ouch, I drive home after work. You know how the traffic is. You know,
Yeah.
there's every time I drive, there are so many rude people,
Right.
and you can get angry, and you can, try to put your bumper right against the guy ahead of you. Once in a while, I see somebody let someone in.
Right,
Someone
right.
be courteous. It just changes the whole thing.
It diffuses.
Yeah.
It has such psychological impact on other drivers. Like,
Yes.
oh, and everyone start. You notice everyone start giving
That's
room
right.
to another.
You see the other drivers start, okay, yeah, that's right. He reminded me I should be patient and courteous.
Yeah. Well, I think we all owe it to each other as believers to remind each other on how to be kind and gentle
Yes.
and to be respectful, because all human beings need that love, that respect, and that kindness.
You know, it's a truism, but something we need to remember. Everybody you meet, every individual you meet is carrying some kind of a burden.
That's right.
If you had that
Rich
burden,
or poor,
that's
all
right.
the same.
If you had that person's burden, you might be just as unpleasant as that person is.
But we don't see
We
what
don't
we
see
do
the
wrong
burdens.
sometimes.
That's
yeah.
right.
You know, back to human value and how God created Adam, in his image. In Jeremiah 1:5, it tells the Lord says, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you." And that makes it so personal.
Yes.
If before he formed us in the womb, he knew us, that means we're all unique as our DNA. We are that unique to the Creator, who is responsible for giving us that living spirit, and which really makes us a very unique make. I said that a few weeks ago. We're not like a car made in an assembly line,
Right.
with a tag name Chevy or Cadillac or, or BMW or Mercedes. We are God's creation.
Right.
And again, I said that before. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but God doesn't put us in a junkyard when He's done with us. On the contrary, He's with us at all times, and He's with us to the last breath we draw. And that rule does not apply just to the elite or the needy or the rich or the arrogant or He has His eyes set on everyone. It's just sometimes we are the ones who do not connect with Him.
Mm-hmm.
But it goes back to your point, how special we are, that the God, the creator of heaven and earth, knew each and one of us.
May I interject?
Yes.
Doctor, at the opening of your presentation, a piece of scripture came to mind to me, Matthew 6, verse 26. I see you smiling. You know what I'm about to say. Look at the birds of the air, for they neither sow nor reap, nor gather into barns, yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not of more value than they?
Yes.
We are special.
Indeed. So, not changing subject, but I want to come back to the discussion, but also I want to seize the opportunity from what you're sit with the Geoscience Institute, with your responsibilities at the Geoscience Institute, on how you deal with a lot of issues regarding creation versus science.
Well, I would. That's an interesting question. I'm glad you asked it, but I want to say something about the presuppositions of the question. The conflict between creation and science. It's often overlooked that science, modern science as we know it today, developed in a culture that was explicitly Christian. Christianity apparently formed the philosophical and sociological context in which science was able, people or scientists were able to function and develop this system of exploring of nature. The person widely regarded, I think, as the father of biology was named John Ray. He wrote a book called The Wisdom of God Manifested in the Works of Nature. There was no conflict for him with science and creation. Robert Boyle, one of the fathers of chemistry, he was a devout Christian. When he died, he left an endowment to set up a lecture series of finding design in nature. Isaac Newton, the father of modern science, really, physics, is said to have written more about the book of Revelation and prophecy than he did about physics. And there are many other scientists. The pioneers of science were, in many cases, very devout, and certainly practicing Christians and believed in creation. But over time, the desire to kind of get out from under the perceived oppression of the church made scholars look for ways to be secular and to separate themselves from Christianity, and kind of materialist philosophy took over. And so that materialism has, in a sense, I want to say it hijacked science, and it's the materialism behind science that is conflict with creation. Just the study of nature is not in conflict with creation. It's the materialist bias that says we are going to explain what we see in nature without God. Well, as long as you are studying the ordinary maintenance of nature, where God is thoroughly consistent in the way he manages it, science works wonderfully. But if you start to look at questions where God interacted in special events, like miracles and creation, there I think science simply doesn't have the tools really to deal with that. I compare it with the auto mechanic. You have an auto mechanic who understands the operation of a car. He can take that automobile apart and put it back together, and it'll work perfectly. It knows how it runs. But that doesn't mean that he has any idea how to design a plant to create or produce automobiles. That's a different skill. It's a different set of circumstances. So I think science is well equipped and wonderful, and we're all thankful for what science has done. I don't want to criticize science at all. As long as it focuses on what God is doing, the way God is consistent in nature. But the materialist bias of science wants to try to push God out of nature, and that causes a conflict. So I would say that's where the conflict is. Now, one of the principles that applies not only to our everyday lives, in our eating and in our sleeping and in our relationships and in our intellect and in our religion, is balance. We need to make sure that we keep a balance. I think it was Solomon said, "Don't be too rich or too poor." And I think he said, "Don't be too religious either." Well, a person needs to keep a balance so that he doesn't get off on either side. There's a ditch on both sides of the road, and it doesn't matter which one you're in, you're stuck either way. So we want to stay in the pathway that God has provided for us, and we'll be better off there. So when it comes to creation, it's possible, I think, to get extreme on one side or extreme on the other side. I think what we need to do is look at what the Bible actually says, and look at what the meaning and the significance the Bible assigns to particular things. And there's lots of questions we'd like to ask, but I think we can spend all our time chasing rainbows, and when there's actually solid things there we can focus on.
It must get frustrating for someone like you when you see some members of the scientific community try to chisel their way at God's creation.
Well, you know, there's different grades of that, but you know, there are some, and this is a kind of a sad thing to say, I guess, but there are some who are almost virulent in their antagonism toward Christianity, toward creation, toward God. And I met a person who was kind of that bent. He's a well-known paleontologist. And I was at some meetings where this whole idea of creation evolution was being discussed. And he spoke to me. He said, I grew up in I won't mention the denomination, I grew up in a Christian home and I don't need God. Ooh. Well, you can say right offhand that his antagonism toward creation has not very much to do with science.
Right.
This is some baggage he's carrying from his background, from his experience in his home. And what you'd like to say is, hey, you know, the God you heard about isn't really the one. You know, those rumors aren't true. What you need to know is what God is really like, and you'd like him.
Yeah. But you see, that's the time, back to your original topic, we still have to show respect and compassion to ones like this, because that's the time and opportunity to show God through us, to show that there is a difference, you know, as believers from non-believers, and that we embrace and respect one another, even moments like this, because I think that tends to tear down barriers when we react in kindness and be more tolerant rather than blow them off and walk away.
Yeah, the only Christians they may have met have been, you know, obnoxious ones perhaps. And that's what they think they're all like.
And that might be the only opportunity they may have for someone to witness with them through their action, through their kindness. And so how you handle someone like that? I mean, it is pretty tough. For a believer, it's very upsetting when you have someone say something like this.
Yes, to encounter anger is difficult, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because anger can easily get out of control, and anger is not something that you reason with. You know, you can't.
It's true.
You can't reason somebody out of their anger. You have to love them out of their anger.
Well, and God is love.
That's right.
So we have to reflect that godly love toward others.
Yes.
We're going to go back to the topic of Adam that you mentioned in your lecture. God created Adam in his own image and pretty much gave him everything he wants. Pretty much empowered him. And the neat thing about that, God used to talk with him and walk with him, which shows God can be our pal, our friend. When he walked with Adam and he spoke with humans, prophets, but they're humans. In spite of all their faults, he talked with them. And he even, you know, I mean, Enoch, for one you know, that I guess he was one of those very close pals to the Lord.
You'd think God had better things to do than spend his time with these people.
And higher beings to deal with.
Yeah.
But it really goes back reflecting that he must have some unique, amazing love for humanity.
Yeah, he must. I mean, it's clear that he does.
And then he reasoned, and some prophets argued and went against his wishes.
Yeah.
He didn't dump them in the middle of the ocean, but kept persuading them and working with them.
Yes, he goes out of his way. And you know, I look at my own life and I see providence. I can't claim any miracles or anything, but I look back and I say, you know, God's been guiding. You know, I don't always follow what I should, but I can just see that he's stuck with me and he's guided me.
Yes. And that means he's with others as well.
Oh, absolutely.
Which really makes it harder and harder, and it should make it harder, especially for those who knows God and knows the words of God, that if he's with me, he's with them, therefore I better be kind.
Yeah.
You know, it reminds me of a teacher. I won't name school, although it's from a past life, and far away from this land, was always very curt, very almost mean-spirited towards students. But when the parent was around, there's a complete turnaround. And regardless of the student age, you know, he showed the biggest kindness and respect. And then as soon as the parents are gone, all rules change again. And that's what keeps reminding me. Whenever I remember that situation, it's like, God may be invisible, but He is with His people at all times. And every action, every wrongdoing we do to someone, it is being watched, it is being seen, not only by the recipient, but the Lord Himself.
And when we realize how much God has guided, cared for, loved us, we can have, I think, a certain amount of security, confidence, trust to say, I can treat others that way too.
Yeah.
I'm admitting that I'm not, you know, an example of that, but
I'm with you. We all have our challenges.
we all struggle. But the thing that I think is in favor of a Christian life is that a Christian has goals, he has values. He may make some of the same mistakes that his secular neighbor makes, but he differs from his secular neighbor in that he says, you know, I should have done better, and I'm going to work on doing better.
Yeah, that's very powerful, actually. Well, and the world expects more from the believers.
Absolutely, they should.
You know, if you watch some of the secular TV, they're often pointing out those issues. You know, they're rubbing it in that, you know, that so-and-so has not shown the so-called Christian spirit. Because unfortunately, the few bad apples gives a bad flavor for Christianity and for the, you know, and false representation of God's love.
And that's true, and that's, you know, that's unfortunate. But I think it's fair to say, who are the people who established hospitals? You know?
Christians,
I
believers.
think they're Christians who established
keepers.
hospitals. So the Christian stumbles along, he makes mistakes, but he gets up and he aims in the right direction. He's trying to get in the right direction. And he, you know, he's establishing orphanages and hospitals and other social services. And in the end, he comes out, I think, bringing honor to God by the way he has shown, reflected God's love onto others. And so, although we struggle, we do choose to do the right thing.
That's the right word. We choose.
Yeah.
And you brought up another point here that, you know, you mentioned hospitals and orphanages and institutions like that, which shows also when the believers come together, they can do greater things.
Yes.
Greater things than we can do individually.
Yeah, and I don't think it would be inappropriate to say Loma Linda University is a Christian medical center. It's a Christian medical center, and I think there are many people who come to work at the medical center even though they may not share our faith, but I think they recognize that in this environment, they're going to be treated better than they would be in a secular institution.
That's right. That's right. I know, Bob, you probably wanted to add something here.
Well, I would also add, in deference to Dr. Gibson, educational institutions.
Yes.
Many Christians are the leading lights and founders of institutions of higher learning.
Oh, yes.
And you're the product of it.
Well,
and you represent
I'm
one.
grateful. Yeah, I've been blessed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, let's take a short break. Music always comes beautiful and handy in times like this as we migrate to the, or before we migrate to the next topic.
Well, these are wonderful thoughts, a wonderful presentation, and I always like it when we have young people with us, young musicians. They are the hope, for lack of a better phrase. We have now with us Richie Peters. He's in the 11th grade here in Southern California, and he is going to play "A Mighty Fortress Is Our God." Thank you so much, Richie.
Amen.
We have had some excellent music tonight, both on the piano from our first performer, Sophia, and Richie, he's in the 11th grade and goes to a high school not too far from Loma Linda in the city of Riverside, Martin Luther King High School. Both schools have excellent music departments, so we couldn't have been more blessed tonight.
Thank you, Bob, and special thank you to Lily Deal, who is behind these talents as well. And future programs will invite her here to talk with her about her music ministry. Back to our subject. Well, let me go a step further. Let's go back to the Geoscience Institute. What are some of the big projects going on in year 2019?
This year?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Well, we had extensive, I guess, extended faith and science conference in May in the Philippines. And we had several, I've forgotten exactly how many hundred of people attended, teachers and pastors. And there was a list of speakers that had probably 10 or 12 or 15 speakers and went on for 8 or 10 days, something like that. And that was a major effort. Then in July, we had a meeting in Australia at Avondale College where we had, I think, just 3 days, but there were about 8 or 10 speakers, I recall, I don't remember exactly, and a lot of teachers from around Australia and around the South Pacific Division, out from the islands and so on. And that was very good. We focused in on the questions of biological evolution and creation and relationships there. And then there was another one. Then, I mean, I guess the point is we had a number of conferences. We had one in Spain. We had a couple of shorter ones that I attended in India and in Colombia. You know, we get around with these.
Is this just open to Adventists, or is it open to the local science community?
It varies with the community that is sponsoring the event.
I see.
In some cases, it is sponsored by the church for the benefit of their employees, and so they pay their expenses to come. In other places, it's open to the public and on the campus, and invite. Sometimes they actively invite. We had, for example, in Bolivia, we were there for some meetings, and so they took the university there in Cochabamba, took advantage of the opportunity, and they went to the leading people of the city. They didn't advertise it publicly. They went to people's offices, and for example, there's a consortium of private universities. They went to the leader of that, and they invited him to come, and he came. And to the leader of, like, I gather it was equivalent to the Chamber of Commerce, the business people, and he came. And they had somebody who had attended the university as a younger person, and now is one of the ministers in the government, and he came. And so they had it's quite an interesting strategy, different from what I've seen before. Usually they announce it publicly in posters and invite the public in, but this time they targeted leaders. Yeah.
And the results, did you feel was very positive? Or
yes.
Was there controversies?
Well, I'm sure there would be, some people disagree, but for the most part, we didn't get into the kinds of things that would be antagonistic. We tried to be on the positive side, and had a number of lectures, and the reaction that I heard anyway was very positive. And I think the positive reaction reflects back to better, not that relations were bad, but to increasing the good relationships between the university and the city. I think it was a very positive experience. Wonderful. It was just a one-day thing.
Yeah. That's wonderful. And what in the plans for 2020?
For 2020, well, of course, we have the General Conference session coming up, and that sort of dominates the landscape.
Is that already coming up? Seems like we just attended. Wow.
Yes. So there will be some activities, but the people who go to the General Conference session, it takes their travel budget, kind of occupies that. So there's less money left over for these conferences, so there'll be fewer and smaller ones.
Right. Let's go back to creation.
Yes.
Creation
Sabbath.
Yes, let's talk about that.
Yeah, Creation Sabbath.
Share with us some of your thoughts.
Okay, well, Creation Sabbath is a date on the calendar every year. It's the 4th Sabbath of October. And it's part of the official calendar for the church. And the possibilities are so interesting. It can be you can celebrate that Creation Sabbath in a very simple way by just inviting a guest speaker to give the sermon on creation, or the pastor can give a sermon on creation. Fairly simple and straightforward. But you can also, in the Sabbath school classes, for the children, you can have them, depending on the age level, you can have them draw or color or build different objects. I was just in Spicer College in India. Of course, there you have university students. And they did something I hadn't seen before, but I really liked it. And that was, they took the 7 days of creation, and the students, for a project, constructed an object that was supposed to represent that day of creation. So for the day one light, somebody made a big light box and had light bulbs in it, and they had reflective, probably aluminum foil or something there to reflect it. And that was day one. Day two, somebody had a big kind of a structure, and from the top of the structure they had little threads, and they had cotton to represent clouds. So there's water underneath and water above, in the second day of creation. That was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
And so you could do something like that. I think in some places they may actually get a group together and go out in the evening with a telescope and look up at the stars and have a little astronomy lesson. I mean, there's all kinds of things you can do.
Right. Is there any programs you folks doing or sponsoring?
Well, let's see, one of our members has arranged his schedule to be in Lebanon, and he's going to have a Creation Sabbath focus in Lebanon. This year I didn't because I had so much other things going on, but last year I arranged my schedule to go to Puerto Rico at Antillean Adventist University, where we had a Creation Sabbath celebration there. So you can work however it works out, you know.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And before we close today, you are the author of Origins. What's that about?
Well, there was, in 2013, the first quarter was, the Sabbath school lessons were on creation. And they asked me to contribute to that. And so I helped out with that. And there's a companion book that goes along with it. And so, yeah, it's called Origins. It's just a little thing. I think it's been pretty good. I'm pleased with it.
You've got
good
positive feedback?
Yes. There's always some negative too, but I mean, yeah, I've had people say, one person just told me, I've got your book and I've underlined it and all this, I just heard that last week. Well, that was kind of satisfying.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you for visiting with us today. We want you to come back to another program at a time of your convenience to talk about the 6 days of creation.
All right.
And hopefully we can have you soon on that topic. I think a lot of folks will be interested into that
great
program.
Topic.
Yes, it is. Well, this is about all the time we have. I want to thank you again, and thank you, Bob, and our young talents that came here and blessed us today with great music. And we want to thank you folks out there for your wonderful support to the ministry of LLBN and for keeping us in your prayers, but also for having us in your homes on a regular basis. Thank you so much for all the love you've given to others. And again, thank you for being with us all these years. And we look forward to see you next week on Christian Connections. Hopefully, we'll have Marlon Paley back with us as we tackle another topic and make another point to believers and maybe non-believers around the world. Thank you for being with us. We'll see you here next week on Christian Connections.